Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brashear-Pashman. Few of us slept well on Saturday night into Sunday, knowing that Iran had launched a wave of more than 300 drones and missiles in its first ever direct attack on Israel. In the early hours of Sunday, sirens and explosions were heard across the Jewish state. Here to talk about how Israel defended itself from what many feared was inevitable is AJC Jerusalem Director Avital Leibovich, who also serves in the Israel Defense Forces Reserves. Avital, welcome to People of the Pod.
Thank you.
So can you share with our listeners what it was like to hear that Iran had launched this wave of missiles and drones? I mean, did Israelis immediately pack up and head for shelters?
I think that was one of the most dramatic nights in Israel's history. You know, we're living in an era which everything is televised and broadcasted. And when those drones have been launched from Iran, that has been broadcasted. So you can imagine millions of Israelis sitting at home, counting the hours until those drones will hit the Israeli airspace. In addition to that, there was a lot of uncertainty of which type of drones we're talking about. What kind of explosives will they carry? Will they make it or not? And also, will these drones be accompanied by other weapons? So, yes, there was huge concern. It was a sleepless night. Between 2 a.m. until 7 in the morning, Israel has been paralyzed with this unprecedented attack. Now, 200 drones that have been fired at the same time to Israel, this is something that the world has never, ever experienced. There was never a country in the world that has been attacked simultaneously by 200 drones.
Well, we also know that there were, in addition to drones, there were ballistic missiles, there were cruise missiles, and we know some of those ballistic missiles could have been fitted with nuclear warheads. And certainly we know Iran's nuclear capability has been developing rapidly for more than a decade. Was that a concern? Was that on the minds of people?
Look, unlike terror groups, you know, they rely on funding of different countries, proxies, and so on. Iran is a country with its own budget, with its own economic means, and has been investing in technologies and procurement and development of weapons of different kinds for decades. So we saw some of that outcome of the Iranian weapons in Ukraine, when Iran sold some types of drones to Russia to hit the Ukrainian civilians. We understood the capacity, the capability. And of course, the Israeli intelligence followed closely the Iranian capabilities. Now, when you have so many options, the warheads of the ballistic missiles can vary. And therefore, there was also uncertainty with regard to what would those ballistic missiles carry. Will they carry conventional weapons? Will they carry non-conventional weapons? In addition to that, the attack came after more than 6 months of a war in Israel. So the level of stress and the level of uncertainty was high to begin with. We're talking about 6 months in which Israel paid the heavy price of more than 600 soldiers and officers who were killed and more than 1,200 civilians. So it wasn't an isolated evening. It really came in the course of a very long war. And now Israel is facing the big question of retaliation, yes or no, when and how.
You know, we have long talked about Israel and Iran being in a proxy war, Hamas and Hezbollah being two of those terror proxies that want to destroy Israel and are already engaged in conflict, as you said, as you pointed out, to do just that. Yet it really was unthinkable that Iran would dare to directly launch missiles at Israel. How did this attack change the thinking? And do Israelis think it is an indication of more to come?
I would say that Israel changed its thinking twice in the last 6 months. The first time was October 7th. Israel never believed that Palestinians who entered Israel on a daily basis from Gaza as workers would be collaborators of Hamas and would supply them with intelligence information about communities, about homes of people, about police stations in cities, and so on. So we understood that we need to change the concept, the operational concept, the strategic concept as well. And the second time was when Iran attacked Israel a few nights ago. And here, for the first time, Iran chose to take a risk and fire over 350 targets, more than 60 tons of explosives at Israel from its own sovereign territory. So, whether it's proportionate or not, whether it's a retaliation to something or not, this does not change the fact that this is a precedent. And as a precedent, Israel, of course, needs to change the way it reacts and it plans. I know that the cabinet has met a few times already since the attack of Iran, and the cabinet is discussing different ways in which it could retaliate, prepare better, prepare the storages of ammunitions that we have. So there are different opportunities for Israel. And one of the questions I want to ask, Manya, is how is the world looking at this? Because this is not an ordinary thing. And one of the statements that came out yesterday was from the G7 ministers' meetings. And I was certain that the statement will primarily include practical steps against Iran, which is not only a problem for the Middle East and Israel, but for the entire world. And one of the leading statements said that, no, we have agreed to convince Israel not to retaliate. And I'm thinking to myself, haven't we learned anything? Do we want to wake up in a few months and discover that Iran turned to a country with nuclear capabilities, with 5 bombs, with 6 bombs? Now, October 7th never would have happened if it wasn't for Iran. Hezbollah attacking Argentina, the Jewish community center, decades ago, and murdering a lot of Jews and diplomatic staff would not have happened if not for Iran. And a lot of terror attacks all over the world as well. So, how many proofs more does the world need in order to take concrete action, concrete measures against this terror global inciter called Iran?
In addition to the United States, Israel's allies and neighbors really stepped up Saturday night. The United Kingdom, France, Jordan, they all helped down some of the drones that were headed Israel's way. But the attack undoubtedly depleted some of Israel's defenses. And so what does Israel need now from its allies, particularly in the way of action by governments in the United States and the EU? What does Israel need to make sure it can defend itself if, God forbid, this happens again or another October 7th happens again?
It's not a secret that the US and Israel are very strong strategic allies. And this has 2 main reasons for it. The first, and maybe the most important one, is the shared values that we hold between us. And the second is the mutual interest. The US needs a strong Israel in the region with strong capabilities, whether it's intelligence or others. And Israel needs also a very close coordination with the US. So when we are maneuvering between these islands of terror in the region, we can work together to overcome those islands of terror. Now, in this situation, I think the coalition that worked together in the countries which you mentioned performed an amazing, orchestrated, successful operation. And part of it comes because Israel is now a part of CENTCOM, the Central Command. This is the command that actually gathers all the countries from the region. So, in addition to being a part of that command, we share knowledge, technology, intelligence. We exercise together with other militaries. And this is the basis for future cooperation, like we have seen a few days ago within that coalition. So, I think those steps are very important. I would say that continued US support for Israel's strength, and obviously we did not plan to fight for so long. And such a long period of fighting demands a lot of ammunition. So the US support, both in budget, but in also resources, military resource is critical for Israel to succeed and continue to defend its people and the country.
My last question kind of references what you just said a moments ago about how the world just doesn't seem to realize the global threat that is posed by Iran. Does Israel's success matter not just to Israel, but to the world at large?
Israel's success is based on an air defense system that was built for decades with Israeli technology, Israeli know-how, the ability to intercept different kinds of rockets and drones is something, first of all, technology we shared with the US and we work in partnership, but also comes out of a lot of investment. Now, I believe that today in 2024, the world needs to aspire for a more stable Middle East. The Abraham Accords was a part of that direction. And furthering and enhancing the Abraham Accords, expanding the Abraham Accords in the future will just help the world to see a more stabilized area. Now, Iran has to be dealt with. There is no question about that. I do expect sanctions and putting on the terror list the Revolutionary Guards and Hezbollah in its entirety. Lebanon doesn't have a president for more than a year because Hezbollah never approved the candidates, for example. So Hamas needs to be on the terror list. The Houthis need to be on the terror list. The Houthis are a problem for the world, disrupting cargo movement in the Red Sea. So these terror groups, proxies, with different sizes, with different intensities of weapons, all imminent in one troublemaker, and that is Iran. So my expectation after a few nights ago is that the Western world, the modern Western world, will gather together and take concrete steps so we do not wake up, surprised, in a few months and find a nuclear Iran ready to launch the rockets with nuclear heads, and we don't know exactly where, to Europe, to Israel, elsewhere in the world.
Well, Avital, I'm glad you're safe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, and Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can subscribe to People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. We'd love to hear your views and opinions or your questions. You can reach us at peopleofthepod@ajc.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tell your friends, tag us on social media with #PeopleOfThePod, and hop on to Apple Podcasts to rate us and write a review to help more listeners find us. Tune in next week for another episode of People of the Pod.